For Chief Investigator Greg Fife, supercooled water droplets that left a ridge of ice on the wings are now the prime suspect. But how to prove it?
Now the real analysis began because we had to understand what was going on in flight with the airplane. We had good flight data recorder information. It only told us what happened, didn't tell us why it happened. We had to try and model this icing event some way.
Of the crash, NASA was just beginning to study the effect of supercooled large droplets on airplanes. Investigators first turned to NASA for help. Together, they launch a daring experiment. They use a US Air Force tanker plane to create a cloud of supercooled water droplets. An ATR-72 flies behind the tanker. Yellow dye in the water shows investigators how the droplets cover the plane. The test should solve the final mystery. How had ice caused Flight 41 to go so badly out of control?
One of the primary purposes of flying the ATR-72 in behind the tanker was to understand how the ice accumulated on the airplane, but more importantly, the effect of that ice in varying configurations of the airplane on the flight surfaces, that is, the ailerons.
Investigators make a startling discovery. A seemingly harmless action meant to increase comfort on the plane may have led to disaster.
Can I get you boys anything?
I'm good.
While American Eagle Flight 4184 was holding, Captain Orlando Aguiar notices that the nose is tipped quite high.
This thing gets a real high deck angle in these trips. Yeah.
Captain Aguiar knows that the plane's high nose angle was producing an uncomfortable tilt in the passenger cabin.
You want flaps 15?
I'll bring the nose down.
Sure.
Extending the flaps would have the effect of lowering the plane's nose, making the ride more comfortable.
I guess Sandy's going woo now.
When investigators duplicated this maneuver, they found that it had a dramatic effect on where the ice ridge formed on the plane's wing. The flaps made the icing problem even worse.
By exposing more of the upper surface of the wing to the oncoming water droplets. And that's one of the reasons why we got the ridge of ice where we got it, was because of the flaps 15 configuration.
That's much nicer now, flaps 15. Yeah.
The crew of Flight 4184 is unaware that a ridge of ice more than a centimeter high has built up on the surface of their wings.
Eagle Flight 184 descend and maintain 8,000.
Got any 8,000 Eagle 184?
The ice buildup has no effect on the flight until First Officer Gagliano begins his descent to 8,000 feet.
I knew we'd do that.
The descent increases the plane's airspeed. This triggers a warning from the flight computer telling the crew they're flying too fast with the flaps extended.
I was trying to keep it at 180.
Gagliano now retracts the flaps. But the routine gesture has a dramatic effect on the plane's aerodynamics.
When they retracted the flaps, as they started their descent down to 8,000 feet, the airplane pitched back up into a very nose-high attitude.
Airflow over the ice-laden wing was disrupted when the nose lifted back up. That created the turbulence that pulled up the ailerons, sending the plane into a roll. The plane stalled and tumbled from the sky.
Had this crew had about 2,000 to 3,000 more feet of altitude, there's a high probability that they would have been able to salvage or recover the airplane before it struck the ground.
The NTSB has uncovered a deadly flaw in a popular airplane. There's a growing concern that unless something is done, this kind of accident would soon happen again. Investigators conclude that problems with the ATR's wing design make it vulnerable to this menace. The agency that regulates U.S. aviation takes drastic action.
We are going to issue an airworthiness directive this afternoon that will preclude the operation of these aircraft into known icing conditions.
The FAA takes swift action, banning all models of the aircraft from flight conditions. This throws regional airlines like American Eagle into chaos. Public concern over the safety of ATR airplanes grows in the aftermath of the Roselawn crash. The most controversial charge, that the FAA had relied on the French authorities to test and certify the aircraft, then rubber-stamped the results.
Therefore, the ATR-72 was never really tested by the FAA in any way, shape, and form as though it was manufactured here.
The plane's French builder proposes to fix the problem by making the de-icing boots wider so they cover a larger part of the wing. The company also rewrites operating procedures, forbidding pilots from using the flaps or flying on autopilot in icing conditions. In response, the FAA issues an amendment to their earlier directive, loosening operating restrictions on the ATRs. Most airlines decide not to take any chances. They move their ATRs to the south, where a warmer climate would reduce the risk of ice. The crash at Roselawn set off a flurry of new research into aircraft icing and the conditions that produce it.
There's a lot of weather data out there. Satellites, radars, surface obs, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, the collection of data.
New techniques in forecasting are being developed to show pilots where icing is likely to occur and help them avoid it.
But we're working on ways to get it to the people who need it. Dispatchers at airlines, meteorologists at airlines, and now even into the cockpit itself.
Many of those changes will take time to come into effect. Pilots like Steve Frederick think that time will cost lives.
The problem that exists is that there is no technology available today to the pilots or anyone on the ground to accurately forecast or predict where these situations of bad ice are going to occur. Once these airplanes have been exposed to the bad ice, it's too late, because these are no longer airline pilots, they're test pilots, and that airplane can fall out from under them and their passengers without any warning and in the blink of an eye.